Cody Cornell. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer here at Swimlane. And I'm here with Bryon Page, who's our director of solution architecture. So we're going to talk here about how we take that foundational level of understanding and that really rich data set that we now have that we didn't have before and actually use it to do automated response. So if I look at this section here, our goal is to go and say, now that I know what's happening in my environment, I have all the information I need to make a decision on it. I want to set up the set of things that I want to happen automatically, because as an organization, we need a backstop. People are human. They make mistakes. They get sick. They get COVID, whatever it is. Like there might be a moment where there's not someone watching. And a lot of organizations, if they do get compromised, it's not the lack of a threat detection tool. It's not because they don't have an IDS or EDR. It's because they're generating so many alerts that they don't actually respond to them all. So what we have here is we're reducing the amount of work that a team actually has to do, but we're doing it with higher fidelity, more consistency, and we're doing it in a way that really starts driving that, again, the maturity of automation. I can start protecting more with the same amount of people without having to staff up to a huge staff. So I'll let Bryon go through that, kind of what that looks to have those automations in place.
Perfect. Okay, so what we previously walked through was within the containment, eradication, recovery, we just had a bunch of response actions for the analyst to perform on. So instead of making those response actions for the analyst to click, we're just actually going to go into the workflow and we'll build some logic that has something along the lines of if a severity is high or critical is an option, right? Execute steps 1, 2, 3, which we'll kind of walk through here. So if I go over to my application and I just go into the workflow is essentially conditional based logic. So if I collapse this and I zoom in on my graph, this is the starting point, right? So the big difference, if you think of like a workflow versus a playbook is essentially like a single execution of something. The workflow in Swimlane is actually a dynamic engine that's directly tied to that case management, which is a living, breathing incident, right? There's machine data coming in, human intelligence data coming in. As things change or as things are impacted, things will automatically happen and execute in the workflow based off of that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a condition at the bottom here, and I'm just going to say that if the severity is ever equal to critical, I want to do a couple different things here. And I can just have all of these execute in parallel. So number one, if it's critical, I'm going to want to go ahead and automatically quarantine the device that's associated with this particular incident. So we'll say quarantine. And I have a task here from CrowdStrike that will quarantine the device, right? Because the data already lives in the case. When we ingested that event, we had the host ID, host name, IP address, all that data already lives in here, right? The second thing is I want to disable user or suspend the user.
What if I'm trying to create an automation, a workflow just like that, using the quarantine one, the CrowdStrike one, for example?
Mm-hmm.
What if the platform doesn't have all the information needed to execute the quarantining? What if I don't have the host name or the IP address of the workstation? You know, what if that wasn't ingested?
Great.
Is there any kind of alerting or something that says like these actions aren't available to you, or like, you know, it won't let me add the CrowdStrike one, or it will and say, hey, we don't have the host name of that. I don't know how to quarantine it.
Yeah, so we could actually add one extra condition in here, and we'll do it for, sorry, my Zoom just went out. Delete my, there we are. Okay, so I'm going to add another condition here on the criticality. And I'm going to say host ID exists, right? So that's an AID for CrowdStrike in order to do the quarantine, right? So I can have two options here. Host ID is missing. So if the host ID is not blank, I'm going to be good to go to execute that. because that's my required input parameter. But if it's missing, equals blank, I would then just have another CrowdStrike action to pull that data. So I don't have that task explicitly built out here, but essentially it would just be in my dropdown here where it could say CrowdStrike pull host details. And as soon as those host details were pulled, this condition is now true because it does exist, and it would automatically execute the quarantine of that device.
Okay. All right.
So you essentially have to build your own error checking.
Yeah, it sounds like you're building the logic for it.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because I mean, it's the systems. You have to tell the system what are the input parameters for that particular API. Like it's not going to know what you need to pass it because it could be a Carbon Black, it could be CrowdStrike, it could be Azure Sentinel-1, it could be any tool out there from EDR, and the various required input parameters for that endpoint could be anything, right? So you can't have a standard field of host name, right? Because that may not work for CrowdStrike versus Sentinel-1 versus a Carbon Black, right? So you definitely have to collect that additional data, and normally that's things that we pre-build. So those templates where I showed you, like, oh, I want to do something with Sentinel-1. When you drop that in there, that UI UX essentially ensures that when you pull the data, you get all the necessary fields, right? So instead of you having to know what those required fields are, we use those templates to say, hey, if you're doing something with Sentinel, you're doing something with Carbon Black, you're doing something with CrowdStrike, here's all the relevant fields that you need in order to do any of the response actions like real-time response or quarantine, isolate, blacklist, etc. So
Yeah, okay. I think I get that.
Yeah, makes sense.
all right, and then the last one, we're just going to create a Slack channel. Okay, and so I'm going to disable this branch for the time being, just because that's one that we built out. So essentially now I've taken a few minutes there and I've said, well, instead of anytime it's a critical event, now when it comes in and it's critical, or if I'm actively working an incident and the case severity is high, and as an analyst, I come in here and say, this is critical, and then save this out, it will essentially do those 3 steps, right? So if I come over to my messaging platform or the, I think I don't know if I have any of the details in there, it'll fire off all those events, right? And we can actually see the flow history. So this is kind of a nice thing too, where based on the previous flow runs, if it's a success or failure, we'll actually be able to see those values executed. So again, the goal here is instead of me saying, oh, it came in as a critical, and then you have to do steps A, B, C, or X, Y, Z, we've now just built that into workflow. So I can still make that determination of, hey, this is where it's at, and this is what needs to happen. But instead of me then having to do any follow-on or preliminary steps after the fact, it's taken care of for me automatically in an automated fashion. Make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. Cody, anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I and I think when, well, I guess I get over here in the middle here. When folks think about security, orchestration, automation, response, this is kind of where the scope ends. Like this is what they think about. This is what I want to accomplish. If I can get my learning information in here and automatically take responses on all of it, then I'm good to go. Like this is kind of where they think they should stop. But at the end of the day, this is responding to things that you see. It's not really being terribly proactive. So kind of as we move on here and talk about the next kind of level of this maturity model here, and my name's Cody Cornell. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Swimlane. I'm here with Bryon Page, who's the director of solution architecture. And we're going to talk about the 4th level of the security ops automation maturity model and really what is automated prevention. And this one is, I think, very seldomly talked about because what a lot of folks think about when they think about security automation is how do I get alerts in, as we've talked about, and then how do I respond to them? That's great. But what we all know is that's responding to something that's bad that's happened What we really want to do is get in front of things. And to get in front of stuff, you actually have to do proactive work. So this is kind of, when people talk about a security offense, they're usually talking about pen testing. And we're not going to talk about pen testing. That's not what we mean by a good offense. We mean, what are all the things that you know you should be doing on an everyday basis that could keep your organization from being potentially compromised? And what we're going to walk through here is an example of how do I look, as a security analyst, which I spent many years doing. One of the things we would do is go out to Pastebin, or we'd go out to I've been pwned, and look to see if our credentials with our domains have been potentially compromised. And then we go and reset those user accounts and notify those users that hey, quit reusing your passwords that you use at work, for your personal stuff, like all these different things that we'd have to go do, but we could never actually keep up with it. It was always something we knew we needed to do, but we never actually had time to do it because there was always one more phishing alert, one more similar, one more piece of threat intelligence to triage. So what we want to talk about now is how do I actually start getting in front? And there's use cases around application security. There's use cases around, endpoint, network, you name it. But what we're going to talk here is about identity.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Cody. All right, so we're actually going to pivot over here to a use case that we actually did with Recorded Future. So Recorded Future essentially has a domain and identity service where they have a lot of analysts. They're consistently, scraping the dark web, looking for potentially compromised credentials, compromised domains, etc. And essentially, you can define what those domains are that you wanted to monitor in Swimlane, and then we just pull it on a special interval, whether it's twice a day or overnight, etc., to be able to pull those credentials in to understand what we've seen. So in this case, the dashboard kind of shows me my breakdown of credential leak severity, right? And we've kind of done the classification based off of a few different metrics, which we'll get into. But if we kind of go into the one critical one, essentially what we've done is we check to see, okay, well, here's the particular email address, query that against my Active Directory, right? Is this a current employee? Yes or no, right? Because if it's not an existing employee, we can kind of make sure that access has been broke. But if they are a current employee, what's their level of access? So we can reach out to the IDP to see, are they a system admin? Are they legal, HR, wherever they work in the organization, right? The other thing we want to find out is, like, did it meet the complexity requirements? Like, were they able to set a password, or was it an older password? Was it a newer password? Was it a valid credential? Was it previously matched to what we've seen? And then, of course, all of that kind of leans into how you want to do that severity classification, right? So that kind of gives you your business logic that you can define of based off of these different data points of current or former, valid credentials, previously seen before, et cetera. What do we want to do in an automated fashion, right? And so by default, once we retrieve those data points and we have those validations, we've just done a common thing where we send a Slack notification to their manager and essentially have done a forced logout and password reset of that user automatically, right? So we're not even asking them what happened or where they shared it or anything else. It's just we're resetting it, force logout, notify their manager. We could even notify the employee out of band with like an SMS or something like that. But then I have all of the details here from what was collected from Recorded Future as far as where it was seen, whether it was on Pastebin, some dark website, or any other data points of where the data was collected from. So pretty straightforward, basic flow. But again, the goal behind this use case is it requires zero human intervention. I can literally just come in here and have reports fired off daily, sent to my mailbox while I'm drinking my morning in the coffee and see what happened. So that's the goal here, is be, like to Cody's point, more proactive than reactive. So we can still do all the KPIs, metrics, dashboards, and reporting, but there's no need for the analyst to review.
This is so applicable to all the things that you never get to. As a security analyst, you spend a ton of time working on the things that are hitting your plate that you have no control over. In the back of your mind, you're always thinking about, what are the things that I could have done today that would have made my organization more secure? Like, should I be searching for the newly observed domain? Should I be looking at things that what connections are unique that are leaving my environment? Do I have users that have latent access, right? Should I be going through my systems and actually reducing the amount of access that they have on a daily basis? The answer to all of those is yes, but I never have the time to do it. So I think that's really what, you know, we see here is there's a lot of things that teams wish they could get to that they don't get to that would actually prevent bad, you know, breaches in the future, but they don't have the cycles to get it done. So that's really what automated prevention is about. It's about leveraging that same framework that you would use for response to be much more proactive to reduce the likelihood of something happening in the